Liam Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lee. Very welcome. I just wanted to talk about the IMF country mission to Dublin in 2009. Were you involved in working with the IMF when they came? I think it was May of 2009.
At that stage, I was on the regulatory side, so I was the acting chief executive of the regulator at that time.
So you were involved with the IMF when they came to do their country report?
Yes.
Okay. And did that involve then being involved in terms of their work in relation to NAMA that they were doing at the time?
Yes, and they comment on NAMA in their report, yeah.
Okay, well, I just wanted to ask some questions around that, if I may. In paragraph 20 of their report, they say the authorities did not formally produce any estimate for aggregate bank losses. They have focused on the needed restructuring of property development loans, which they rightly view as at the heart of stress faced by banks. So why didn't you have any estimates for aggregate bank losses at the time?
Well, actually what we spent a lot of that year doing was trying to get a good estimate of aggregate bank losses. That took a significant amount of time, and in fact, even after that, even after NAMA was set up and NAMA had specialist valuers, it still took a significant length of time after that, because basically land banks had to be looked at, individual loans had to be looked at, connections had to be looked at, what collateral was there. So it took a longer time to do it than you might have expected.
You couldn't produce them to the IMF, but you were working on them?
Well, we obviously shared with the IMF whatever we had.
Because they just said they noted that you did not formally produce any estimate for aggregate bank losses. No,
and I think that comment may also have been in relation to the other authorities. Normally speaking, in IMF reports, when they refer to the authorities, it could be the regulator, it could be the relevant government department.
Was it a mistake to focus on the restructuring of property loans and banks rather than to spend more time focusing on the aggregate losses that they were facing?
Well, I think the property losses were a huge part of the aggregate losses. So, and there was again a sequence. So in terms of trying to cleanse the balance sheets of the banks so that they would be able to engage in lending and try and get the real economy working again, I think the focus had to be on the larger ones first.
Okay. In the second part of that paragraph, it says that staff noted that losses are likely to extend beyond the property development sector as the economy weakens, and the design of NAMA should incorporate that possibility. Were the IMF saying that NAMA should deal with more than just property-related loans?
Yes, I think at that stage they were looking at what might have been done in other countries, and in other countries it wasn't just the larger loans, but it was also some smaller loans. I think here the department were of the view that it would be the larger loans, and again there was a sequencing there.
Okay, because in paragraph 24 of the same report it says that the authorities saw merit in the IMF staff's suggestion that NAMA implementing legislation should encompass a broader range of loan types. So you're in agreement with NAMA's view?
Well, I think the view at the time was that the legislation, because we were in an area where none of us had particular experience of, that the legislation should be broad and allow for different decisions to be taken within that legislation. So in other words, that it would be enabling without requiring it to be that way.
But was the thinking at the time that NAMA might have a broader scope than just property-related loans going onto its books?
I don't recall particularly. I don't recall that it was ruled out, but I do recall that the priority at that time was in relation to the larger property loans.
Okay. And then, do you recall why the IMF staff queried why NAMA was acquiring good loans as well as bad ones?
Yes, and again, I think at that stage, NAMA took the approach, and NAMA will explain to you how this worked much better than I, but that they would take all the connected loans. And in fact, that actually sped up what you rightly said was a very long process. That actually sped it up by taking all the connected loans. And again, some countries had done this differently, so the IMF would be looking at what other countries had done, and in some other countries they had done it differently.
Okay. In paragraph 25 of that same report, it states that staff noted that nationalisation could become necessary but should be seen as complementary to NAMA. So at that point, when this was published in June 2009, were your offices preparing for the nationalisation of any further banks in the Irish banking system?
I think we ruled nothing out at that stage, and I think all the authorities were ready for whatever might happen. We weren't anticipating it, but I think at that point in the crisis, you'd be very foolish if you didn't leave every possibility open to cater for it.
Is this not the IMF anticipating it in their country report?
No, but what the IMF are saying is that, just read the sentence to me again there.
Noted that nationalisation could become necessary, but should be seen as complementary to NAMA.
Yeah, and the staff are simply noting that.
Okay.
So I don't think they're saying that there was any resistance by anybody to that.
No, of course. But what I'm wondering is, given that the IMF took time to note this in their country report, did you in your office then say, well, look, we need to look at the banks very carefully, and we need to see about which ones might have to be nationalised? And then given what happened in 2010 at the end with AIB, I mean, did that not set and train, work in your office to prepare for that eventuality?
See, I think the sequence of that would have been after the loans were moved off the books and we were at a stage where we could anticipate what would be left behind. I think that's precisely what we would be looking at in that stage. So once we knew what the level of the loan losses were going to be, those type of decisions would then be much easier, of course.